once again, this is the place we're attempting to be as honest as we can about this and that. And yes, sometimes we use the word God. Iconically, I've got a question. If we use the word God iconically, is it actually an attempt to express something that we are not smart enough to understand? I don't know. I don't know, but it's a good question, isn't it? Okay. It's, however, it seems to be a term that people have used over the years to orient themselves for purposes of forming a functional society in a sense. And I would like to speak about that a little bit later in the show. But tonight I want to go directly to Bob and ask Bob a few questions. Tonight is the night when I will not ask anyone for final thoughts. And so let's keep that on the table, and we're going to go right to cut to the chase if we can. Bob, when it comes to psychology, what are your thoughts on how the discipline of psychology has evolved? What say you?
Wow. Well, it's certainly been through quite an evolution, like all disciplines have. They begin with, you know, most of the academic disciplines begin by breaking away somehow from philosophy, and then and then after that they start various different naive theories, and then they improve upon them, and they make a lot of mistakes along the way, and they finally, fine tune it. They finally develop a consensus of methodology that then becomes adopted. It becomes accredited in some manner. It never entirely escapes some of the socio-political elements. And depending on what the particular discipline is, it will have some of its own unique problems. Of course, some of the unique problems, I think, when it comes to psychology, is the fact that we're trying to study something that we cannot actually hold in our hands or see with our eyes, or we're trying to talk about the dynamics behind the qualia of another person, which is in many ways totally private as an experience. People can share that private experience, but we don't even have ways of determining with accuracy whether or not what people are sharing is really the truth, or that they even understand.
Right.
They're articulating what it is that they understand about their own experience in their own terms and in their own words. And so psychology is a discipline that possesses this certain distance from its object of study. But nonetheless, various different methods have been developed that have given us a great deal of warranted consideration when it comes to various different theories concerning explanations for psychological behavior, development, etc. Does that answer your question, or?
Sure, sure. I'm just trying to feel some things out tonight because from time to time I get these golden nuggets. Well, not just from time to time, all the time. I typically, I mean, it's an occasional, not occasional. It's all the time. I don't know what I'm talking about tonight. Every time that we do FaceTime, you give me golden nuggets, and that's what I want to do tonight, is to see if you can yield a bit of gold. I've been talking with several psychologists here lately, and some of these people have various opinions about this and that. And so when it comes to the hardwiring, let's say that we're born with, do you think that we are built? That is, are we hardwired to be initially neutral about the world that we find ourselves in? What say you?
That is, in my opinion, a question that is a little too open-ended. I think that there are some ways in which we are hardwired. I think there's some ways in which we are pre-wired, that is not ready to go, but modularly available, and other ways in which what's going to happen psychologically all depends upon the experiences we go through and how that interacts with the pre-wiring and the hardwiring. So, I mean, there isn't a single answer to that question. And it's not as if we clearly understand what dynamics fit into which category. But there was a time when it was very popular to believe that human beings were a blank slate. And some psychologists would claim that, give me give me your children, and if I can experiment with them, I can turn them into a lawyer or a criminal. It just all
Right.
depends on how we fashion things for them. It was thought that people were a blank slate. I think Steven Pinker wrote a book that a while back, but when he wrote it, there was still enough controversy in the academic community that some people anticipated he'd get in trouble for it because he wrote a denial of the blank slate, and that we possess an actual human nature. And of course, I think that Noam Chomsky has also demonstrated this not only in his theory of linguistics, but also in his scathing review of verbal behavior by B.F. Skinner, where he showed that this behaviorist approach to language as an attempt to understand it was extremely flawed and even inconsistent with some of the valid science of behaviorism. So, it's there's a lot going on with our human response and our human development. And it is difficult to all, we do know this. There are genetic factors, there are epigenetic factors, there are experiential factors, there are perspective factors, there are cultural factors, and these are all working together, and they're all working together behind the veil of the human face, as it were, so that we're not really capable of proving how they connect or how they don't connect.
Right.
But by isolating statistical observations and giving thought about it and giving traveling on a beam of light or various other, he had a wide variety of thought experiments that he used as a way of entertaining a question and trying to come to a better understanding of what might be going on. And it was through this imagination that he came across a lot of ideas. Of course, Albert Einstein knew that then these ideas had to be formulated and then tested
Right.
in order to be validated. But it was through that imagination that he explored the discovery of some of these hypotheses.
After spending many years reading this ancient abjad that I speak about a lot, dogma provided structure, namely for these people, and spirit provided transformation or transcendence. When I talk to psychologists about dogma, that is in the context of structure, and we're not talking about perfection, because they would move from one structure to another. And this is why the Apostle Paul, I think, when he said that he moved from faith to faith, he was simply saying that I'm moving from one perspective to another perspective. And this was transitional theology. And so anytime that we get into theoretical theology, it's quite the interesting conversation. But when I talk to some of these psychologists of today, they seem to think that in a paranormal sense, we could call a spirit, we could say that a spirit may be a pattern of being, in that patterns can be transmitted across multiple substrates, independent of its material substrate. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, you've spent a lot of years, studying the brain, studying human behavior, and even the Bible. You're very literate in all these areas. Talk to me.
Well, the word spirit is polysemous. It has been used to apply to a wide variety of dynamics that that really take on a common theme of the wind, which at one time was not really well understood. Where does it come from? Where does it go? Why do we have it? What's it made of? And as a result, spirit, which comes from words that meant breath or wind and air and things like that, it was oftentimes used to talk about that undefinable permeation of something that seems to nonetheless possess a theme and a structure. So, yeah, uh, although I don't think that there's any one view that psychologists would hold about that, many
True.
psychologists would deny anything spiritual. Many would claim that spirituality is something very important. Some would claim that it's simply an emotional element of our makeup. So, I mean, there's a wide variety of attitudes about spirit and what it is. But it is so the word gets used, and nonetheless, in talking about either a dimension of ourselves or in talking about a certain attitude that seems to maintain a bias that controls it'll control some of the things that we say or do, or the way that we respond, as if we are somehow walking along some sort of a predisposed script. You know, people talk about a spirit. Even Christians sometimes talk about a spirit of anger, or things like that. So I mean, the word, it gets used in so many different ways. It's kind of hard to know what we're talking about sometimes, I think.
One of the things that I have found is that not just with psychologists, but also philosophers, they have various views, and which I'm very, very thankful for, various views on this and that. I keep saying that belief is part of the biology of the mind. I think that's very important when looking at belief, simply because it seems to be part of this vast network of intentionality. And I talk about intentionality because some philosophers and actually cognitive scientists look at intentionality as the capacity by which the mind represents, let's say, X, Y, or Z. And so it's this representation, if you will. It's very much like love, or even hope. And so when people are kind of up in the air about belief, I'm not so sure that most people who talk about belief understand belief.
I would agree with that.
Okay,
And when it
let me
comes to
make a couple more points
intentionality,
before
the,
you.
the, com-
Okay, let
the
me make a
common
couple.
theme behind intentionality.
Let me,
I'm sorry, did I interrupt you?
yeah, let me make a couple more points, because
Yeah.
when we talk about belief, I think that there are matching concepts in a sense. In other words, belief and desire, that is. If we're talking about belief and desire, we see this in a sense metaphorically. These are matching concepts. If I look at belief, especially in this context, how things are, the mind to world direction of fit would be the best way, I think, to put that. When I look at desire, how we want them to be, that is the world to mind direction of fit. So if we have that distinction, but it's difficult to tell the difference between desire and belief, where do we go from here with this idea? Go ahead.
Oh my goodness, where do we go from here? Well, we're going to go in a wide variety of different areas to explore to see what we can do with it. Let me go back to intentionality, and then I'll come back to belief and desire. Part of, if you want to understand intentionality, basically, from a very foundational point biologically, it appears that all sentient organisms go about doing what they do for what appears to be some purpose. And they do this consciously aware to some degree of what that purpose may or may not be. And as a result, they have goal-driven behaviors. And as a result, many times we can ask the question, well, when we're looking at a behavior, well, what is this organism intending to accomplish by engaging in this behavior, either consciously or subconsciously, or through sort of biological drive or house? And I think that even the book, oddly enough, The Selfish Gene, actually explores the split between biology and psychology, in that I think that he tries to show us how our biology has evolved in such a way as we will behave in a certain manner that actually has ended up being productive to the continuation of the species to continue to exist. But it's not as if we sit around thinking, oh my goodness, we have to do our duty to make sure that the race continues. We don't necessarily operate with that as our intention or our goal. We find ourselves attracted to certain people after we reach a certain age, and we end up having families, and we do this, and we have a life, and it just turns out that all those things that we wanted to do end up continuing the human race. And so we are about having an intention, but our body seems to have given to us a list of drives and nature and an innate sense of things to do that kind of stack the deck in favor of the intentionality of the genetics. So in trying to understand that we are human beings that seem to possess a conscious intentionality that is related to, but not directly connected to the same intentionality of our biology. This creates conundrums and an interesting complexity in trying to understand human behavior.
That's good stuff. With that said, Daryl, jump in there because I want you to ask Bob a few questions about what we've been discussing, simply because every psychologist, philosopher that I've talked to, when it comes to, let's say, this idea of belief, this is not, it's not understood A to Z. In other words, I could say to a degree by rationality and perception, we do understand belief, but past that, it's there's so much more to learn, and yet we're arguing over what is belief and what isn't in a well, in a way that presents the arguments as quite certain. I think that's absurd. But what are your thoughts, Daryl?
Well, I tell you what, I spend a lot of time just observing the change that has taken place in me, especially more recently. I spent a lot of my life believing a certain group set, you might say, that actually took me a particular direction in my life. But when certain things come my way that shed better light on the things I was believing, things begin to change. And when you talk of intentionality and things of this nature, it really gets my attention because I'm much more interested in that now as a person who at one time thought I got born again. I got this new nature that sent me a different direction. And now I'm just this one person. I'm not the original person plus this new person that's redirected. And so there's a lot of sorting out in that thing that takes place. And, this, if I think of my desire, my intention, like I said, I feel like I'm involved as a human being. So I guess if I could present that in the form of a question, this wouldn't be considered evolution, I'm sure, but in some sense, there is an evolving of a person as he is exposed to better information, you might say. So you could categorize this possibly for me. I don't know if it fits into what's being talked about or not.
That's good stuff. Unfortunately, right now we are having latency issues. We're not going to have a long show because of that. Let's cut to the chase and get down to some nitty gritty. Bob, what kind of response do you have for Daryl?
Unfortunately, I don't have any response for Daryl because I heard a highly distorted, quick echo for everything he was saying. I couldn't hear a word he was saying because of that distorted echo that I was getting. Highly distorted echo. So I had no idea what he said. I couldn't hear.
Okay.
Unfortunately. But if you could, if there was something that you heard from him that you thought, I can hear you well, I don't get a distorted echo from you.
Okay. Perhaps, Daryl, you could do sign language and Bob could read that.
Is it still there? I mean, I guess it's going to be there for. You can't understand me, right?
All I hear is noise. I hear your voice, but then I hear all this noise on top of it, and it's louder than your voice, so I can't hear you, unfortunately.
We have had our crew working today on some sound issues, and we're still having problems, and so please forgive us. I'm not Catholic, but I'll do the cross. Anyhow, okay, we're having fun. I wanted to get into some thought experiments tonight.
Well, before you do,
I'm not going to do that simply because
back to the
we're having
belief
latency
thing.
issues. Go for it.
When it comes to certain cognitive behaviors, we are not honest as human beings. If there's something that is similar between two cognitive behaviors, one that I like and one that I dislike, I can be biased towards not willing to admit their similarity. And as a result, all human beings practice belief. Belief is a very human behavior.
Right.
And when people object to certain things that people believe in, they want to somehow, deprecate or criticize the action of belief. Where what's really going on here is it's quite possible that our belief is misplaced. But I'm sorry, if you're a human being, you practice beliefs of some sort, and you must. It's part of who and what you are. And not that, but since we're not born with all the answers, and it takes time to acquire insight, belief is an extremely useful cognitive faculty for human beings to have. However, one should understand the quality of belief. Some beliefs may be awesome. Some beliefs can be extremely superstitious and stupid and naive or gullible or wrong. And because they're beliefs, they don't possess the sort of handles that knowledge has, and as a result, are far more susceptible to being criticized. And as a result, but nonetheless, I mean, without regard, beliefs exist. People have them. All people have beliefs. All people rely upon far more beliefs than they realize. Even for some of the knowledge that they have, it's incorporating a great number of beliefs with it. Now, let's get back to intentionality. It appears that beliefs are part of what help us to achieve whatever purposes we seem to think are worthy of pursuing as a goal. And so beliefs are just simply a part of the human repertoire of behaviors, cognitive behaviors that we are involved in our attempt to meet the challenges of life.
That's rather good, Bob. I like that.
Bob, I have to wonder a little bit over the last 20 hours with some things I've been doing here, how much of belief is habitual. And when I say this, what I'm referring to is about 20 hours ago, I decided that I was going to put my pipe down for the last time. And through the day, I would find my hand beginning to move toward it to pick it up, a totally habitual action. But not only that, also a justification for doing that with, oh, I'll just have one and then that'll be it for today, without even thinking about it. That's the justification as soon as the hand is moving. How much of belief is that automatic justification for our actions or for the positions we hold in other areas?
That's an excellent question and a good observation on your part, because it demonstrates that there's one thing about all human beings. We seem to believe that we're not allowed to behave in any manner without having warrant or cause for doing so, unless we give ourselves a break to do something that we have demonstrated to ourselves or claimed ourselves to be of no consequence and just hanging out, hanging loose. So here's a behavior: smoking the pipe. If you're going to do it, you already know an awful lot about what smoking does. So you're going to try to find a way of justifying it. And this is something all human beings do. When there's something that we have as a desire, sometimes it's not good enough for us to say, you know what, I want a puff of smoke. And you know why I want a puff of smoke? I don't know why I want a puff of smoke, but I want a puff of smoke. So let's see if I can invent some cartwheel I can do mentally to warrant my doing this actually rationally, instead of the fact that I just want to smoke because I like doing it.
Yeah, you got it.
So as a result, when we are dealing with something that puts us in a conundrum, we really practice attempts at getting away with dishonesty, don't we? And it's just part of the way human beings behave. It's one of the things we do. But it's interesting to note, however, and I think it's a good thing, that we seem to recognize that when we know an awful lot about a behavior, about its pros and cons, we at least recognize that we have to somehow justify it. We have to somehow warrant it.
Yeah, and how much of that warrant is just already pre-programmed, pre-scripted for us, just waiting for that trigger.
Well, yeah, your
for that-
perspective
for
has
that-
already been formed in a wide variety of ways, and if you've done this a lot of times, you got layers and layers of justification and warranty,
Yeah.
and that has to be undone, and that's taken apart layer by layer too, confrontation by confrontation, and eventually it goes away. Sometimes layer at a time, sometimes several layers, you know, but but you brought up the question of habit. Perhaps routine or ritual, or you know, the truth is, no human being has the time to think through everything completely and thoroughly, and as a result, the human brain possesses these shortcuts,
Yeah.
and some of those shortcuts are like habits. You know, this is what I just do, and this is how I solve these problems. So let me just pull this heuristic out again, and I'll do that. And so, you know, we're a very heuristic animal, and that's what we do. And so you might think of it as habit or nature, whatever. We certainly do it, and we do it repeatedly.
Yeah, because as I said, what really impressed me is I expected the hand motion toward where I usually
Right.
keep the pipe, you know, to go and grab it. What I didn't expect was that instant rationalization coming along with it, and that was a revelation. Something I really want to explore.
And it's part of the process of undoing the habit, of becoming aware of the rationalization, because you're becoming aware of the things you've been telling yourself all along.
Yes.
It's not as if you invented something entirely new when you gave yourself that rationalization.
Yeah, it's already there, and how much of that applies to other things,
There's
religious
no way,
belief, for example, or
really
political
know.
belief, or
Right. This is the thing that we were talking about before, where it's very theoretical. We don't know. We don't know where that line is. How often do we do this, and to what degree? You know, we certainly know we do it, don't we?
and I wonder how many people. I'm not going to pat myself on the back, even though I'm already doing it. How many people think about that? Really have the time to make the observation. Oh, look. It looks like this is what I did. I wonder why I'm doing it that way. Because that might provide a can opener, if you will, or a crowbar to modifying belief sets that are habitual, if they are indeed.
Real change, deliberate change, and intelligent change requires the luxury of free time.
Yes.
A person
And
under
it's-
stress, under the gun, with too much to do, doesn't enjoy any such luxury as being able to think through why they do what they do.
Yep. Okay,
Well-
then.
Now, you guys have been talking. I've been investigating our latency issue. I think we're going to close the show simply because we do have some problems here. But I'm going to ask our viewers to stay tuned because we're going to push up another show doing some audio tests, and we do need the help. I'm not going to ask for final comments, but I did want to go back to Daryl, and I wanted to get your thoughts on why you believed in Jesus for so long.
Well, it depends on whether you can understand me or not. Can you understand me?
I can read lips, just do sign language and all of that. I can hear you.
To me, Daryl, you're coming in loud and clear. I don't
Yeah,
hear
it's very
the,
clear to me, Daryl.
echo.
Okay, well, I will keep it short and simple, and maybe if you need to, you can translate. This was just what I knew. This is what I was raised on, and you can feel good about something. You can have an imaginary friend, and it may be more than that. It may be more than we know on our own volition. But as far as my belief and reason I believed for so long, until other information came my way that challenged it, I just thought it was true. I thought I had given my heart to this individual, and that this individual actually was God, And because of that, I had a special relationship, special situation. And unless anybody proved otherwise, that was, my truth.
That's
About
good.
as simply as I can put it.
Yeah. Okay. Once again, we've had a good show. We have so many people who just enjoy the honesty here, the kindness. I guess that's something that we're known for. And so if you see Saitin Bruggencate, invite him back. We'd love to have him on the show again. Same thing is true with Eric Coven and the rest of the people who really have a lot to argue polemically about or whatever. It would be fun to have them back on.
Well,
But,
Dr. Jones,
yes.
I don't know if we were talking about this on air or if it was before we went on air. I was on Steve McRae's show a few days ago with Saitin Bruggencate, and he asked me to send his best wishes to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Perhaps there is a chance of you two talking.
I really think that, I don't want to disparage his theology. I don't want to disparage the person. I do have many, many questions that would, sometimes when I ask ministers around here and other places questions, it does get them a bit defensive. Now, there's a difference between being an apologist, one who defends the faith, and one who gets defensive. Two different things. Apologetics has become, in a sense, a discipline within fundamentalism. I would not call it a discipline, but they think of it as a discipline, and so I'm not going to argue with them simply because they have chosen, that term to go along with it. I'm simply wanting to explore why so many people go in this direction or that direction theologically. I would like to explore why people are atheist. I don't think that it's that clear. Not to me, it isn't. So many people have told me over the years they became an atheist because they listened to me. I'm very skeptical. That's true. I'm very honest about the Bible. That's true. I don't worship the Bible. I let go of the Jesus notion, that is this feeling of, wow, I need to give him my heart, my life, my trust. I let go of that years ago. However, I see that there is a need for speech in the context of logos. And if I were to say anything, I think that the power of speech transforms, in a sense, our interpretation of reality. When you go back and study human behavior throughout, the centuries, we see that we had a Moses, and this Moses, I can prove this from the Abjad, this Moses was actually created. We're not talking about a real person, but we're talking about a character in a text. And this character within the text stood for law, simply because people wanted something to hang on to when it came to law. That doesn't mean that the law was perfect. It simply meant, that's the best that they had, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. They also had a father image, if you will, Abraham. Do I think that the Abraham of the text actually existed? Not hardly. I think that the Abraham of the text represented a father image, something that they could deal with, that is, in a parenting type situation, because people were having difficulties, that is, with their family structures, their tribes, and so on. There's also something about having, let's say, speech that is predictive. This predictive thing was very much played a major role in Judaism, that is, through the prophet Isaiah. And so do we see, that is through this logos, that is through speech, do we see transformation? We actually do. And I think this is why John said Jesus is that logos. simply because he came along and his speech, his rhetoric about love was so transformative. It gave them a different understanding of their reality. And like I say over and over again, I've said this so many times I can't even count, the truths that govern behavior are much different than the truths that emerge from facts. And so if we're talking about people attempting to work within a framework of dogma, and I think that all of us work with dogma. A lot of atheists would like to claim that they have no dogma, but if by dogma you mean structure, show me a person who doesn't have structure within any civil experiment. That doesn't make sense. And this is why I'm saying that at least people were honest enough back in the day to say, yes, they did have a dogma, they did have structure, and yet what was in conflict with that structure, that dogma, was actually spirit, because this was the thing that brought transformation. It was simply how, people would get inspired, if you will. We're not talking about Holy Spirit. The usage throughout the extant translation models that we have, every time that I read about the Holy Spirit, I keep saying that's very, very unfortunate, because there's nothing holy about this Spirit. These are church terms. These are not manuscript. In other words, when I look at the authors of the manuscripts, they were not talking about holy in any sense of the word. Christians repurposed these terms. In other words, Christians lied to us. They were talking about something that made sense to them. And I'm talking, and I should have closed the show because we have so much latency. And so, Bob, just tell me to shut up and we'll get out of here.
But let me just cap that off by saying that when they were talking about spirit, they were not talking about anything too different from what we're talking about when we talk about consciousness or
Right.
intentionality.
You're right on the button. That's true. That's good.
So let's close her down and start her back up again. Let's see what we get.
Okay, we're going to close it down and see what goes on. Goodbye. Good night. We'll be back.
Take care, all.